Most people think raising their first million is a handful of calls and a solid pitch deck. You send the pitch, you hop on a few conversations, maybe you follow up once or twice, nothing closes, the conversations that felt warm go quiet, and the question starts creeping in. What is wrong with my deal? Here's the answer. Probably nothing. The deal's not the problem. The expectation is the problem. The map you're using does not match the actual territory. Raising your first million is a very specific process, and almost everyone who tries it for the first time underestimates it in the exact same way. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand what the process actually looks like, the real numbers, the real timeline, and the real reason most first-time sponsors stall out. And most importantly, what you need to do differently to not end up like them. My name is Seth Bradley, securities attorney, and I've structured over 750 funds and syndications and been part of more than $9 billion in real estate transactions. I work with sponsors at every stage, from someone structuring their very first raise to operators running $100 million funds. And I've watched first-time sponsors make the same set of mistakes over and over again. This video is about the biggest one. Let me tell you the single biggest mistake new sponsors make when they start their first raise. They assume 10 conversations will get the job done, maybe 15 if they're being generous with themselves. Send the deck to a dozen people, take some calls, follow up once or twice, and expect to hit $1 million. The reality is it usually takes 10 times more than that. Grant Cardone, 10x, it always takes more. And I don't say that to discourage you. I say it because understanding this single fact changes everything about how you approach the process. You've got to go bigger. You've got to think bigger. You've got to take massive action. Think about what you're actually asking someone to do. You're asking them to hand you $50,000, $100,000, sometimes more. And the trust that you need to get over that hurdle is huge, especially if they just met you through a meta ad. It's not a decision people make after one phone call. It's a trust decision, and trust is not built in a single conversation. It's built through repeated exposure over time. I watched this play out firsthand with two sponsors raising at the same time in the same market with comparable deals. The first one had 10 conversations, nothing closed. He called it a bad market, he moved on and never raised the fund, and really he's out of business now. The second sponsor had the same size deal, same market conditions, same basic pitch. He had 75 conversations before he crossed the finish line, and now he's on his third deal already. Same opportunity, similar environment, completely different willingness to stay in the process and to take massive action. And here's the part that should hit hard. The first sponsor quit at 10 conversations, never knowing he was 65 conversations away from closing. He thought the market said no. The market never got a real chance to say yes. Deals are closing today, even though the market's slow. Capital is moving today, even though the market is slow. The number of conversations you're willing to have is the variable. So go in with the right baseline. Get your mind right. Plan for 50 to 100 meaningful conversations, not as a pessimistic projection, a realistic one. Track your outreach, build a pipeline, treat this like a numbers game because that's exactly what it is. If you build your psychology around 10 conversations, you'll quit at 12. If you build around 100, you'll be standing when the momentum finally breaks your way. Here's another thing most new sponsors get wrong, and it costs them months of wasted effort. They go looking for strangers with capital. Yes, strangers. They think the path to their first million is finding high net worth investors that they've never met, impressing them with a fancy pitch deck, and converting them from cold to a committed LP. And while cold outreach eventually becomes part of how capital raising works at scale, it's almost never how the first million comes together. Your first raise almost always comes from the people who already know you. They already know, like, and trust you. Maybe it's family members, maybe it's friends, it's in your sphere of influence. It's not strangers that found you from Meta. Friends, family, former colleagues, business partners from a previous job, people from your church, your neighborhood, your old industry, people who've watched you operate over a long time and already have a baseline of trust in you as a person. There's a legal reason for this too. Most first raises happen under a 506B exemption, which means you can raise from people whom you know and have a pre-existing substantive relationship with. You're not marketing to the general public under the 506B exemption. You're going to your network. The structure exists precisely because the trust foundation of a first raise is typically personal, not transactional. Now, here's what most people get wrong, even after they understand this. They assume that because someone already knows them, the trust conversation is already done. But that's not true. It's not. There's a meaningful difference between personal trust and financial trust. Someone can like you, respect you, genuinely want you to succeed, and still not be ready to hand you $100,000. I've seen this dozens of times. Sponsor goes to a close friend or family member who might be wealthy and have some money, pitches the deal, and is genuinely surprised when they don't get an immediate yes. They feel rejected, they think the relationship wasn't as strong as they believed, and they go home with their tail tucked between their legs. That's the wrong read. What happened is they showed up asking for a financial decision before the financial trust had been established. Those are two different things, and they develop on different timelines. Which brings me to the most important tactical point in this entire video. The biggest mistake you can make is waiting until you have a deal to start the conversation. Let me say that again. The biggest mistake you can make is waiting until you have a deal to start the conversation. By the time your offering is ready, the people in your network should already know you're in the business. They should already understand generally what you're building, why it's interesting. They should already have a mental picture of you as someone who operates professionally and takes this seriously. If you show up for the first time with a deal in hand, you're asking someone to make a financial decision before the relationship has had any time to develop into that kind of trust. You're essentially starting the trust clock the same moment you need it to already be done. Start the conversations now. Start talking about deals. Start talking about investments. Even if you're 6 months from your first deal, especially if you're 6 months from your first deal. Have a coffee. Share what you're learning. Tell them what you're investing in. Talk about the market. Stay visible. Stay consistent. Show up on social media so that when a deal is ready, the trust is already there waiting for it, and you don't sound desperate in that conversation. Even people you know can sound or can feel desperation in your voice. You don't want to be in that place because people can hear it. Now, let's talk about what is actually happening when an investor goes quiet. Most sponsors read silence as rejection. Sometimes it is. They assume the person is not interested, move on, and go looking for new prospects. When an investor goes from warm and engaged to suddenly unresponsive, it almost never means that they decided no. It almost always means they do not feel certain enough yet. Not about the deal though. It's not the deal. Don't focus on the numbers and the deal and the market and all these other things. It's about you. It's about positioning you. Here's the question running quietly in the back of every investor's mind. In every single conversation, whether they say it out loud or not. Do I trust this person enough to hand them my money? And it's a lot of money, so you need a lot of trust. And it's even more specific than the general question suggests. What they're really asking is, what happens when something goes wrong? Because something almost always goes wrong. If you get in this game and you stay in it for long enough, there's gonna be problems. That's not pessimism, that's reality. We all know that the last few years especially. The renovation costs are more than projected, the timeline gets pushed, the exit does not materialize on the schedule you laid out, rates move, tenants leave, COVID hits, the market shifts. There's so many things that can happen. Every experienced investor knows this. They have either lived it themselves, watched it happen to someone they know, so what they're quietly evaluating, even if they cannot articulate it in those terms, is whether you are the kind of operator, the kind of person who handles problems well. Whether you'll communicate honestly when things are hard and transparency, and not just when things are going well. Whether you have actually thought through the scenarios that they're really quietly worried about, but they're not talking about out loud. When you lead entirely with returns and projections and numbers, when your pitch is all upside, you're skipping the part of the conversation they actually need to have. I had a client who made this mistake consistently in his early raises. Every meeting was polished. He was really well put together. Deck was clean, numbers were strong, personable, articulate, clearly smart. Investors kept going quiet on him. It was kind of hard to put together, but I knew what it was. We dug into it together. The pattern became obvious. He never talked about risk. Not because he was hiding anything. He had genuinely thought through the downside scenarios, but he just assumed that dwelling on the risk and hitting on that all the time would make investors nervous. So he focused entirely on the opportunity, the upside, all the positive things, and not talking about the downside risk and then evaluating it. What investors heard was this person either hasn't thought about what could go wrong or they're not willing to have that conversation with me. Either way, they're not comfortable and they're not sending you $100,000. The fix was simple. He started walking investors through the risk scenarios himself proactively before they asked. He would say, let me tell you what we've stress tested and how I've structured this deal to protect capital if things don't go as planned. The response, it was immediate. Investors leaned in. Meetings that used to end with, let me think about it, started ending with timelines and next steps in fully funded deals. Nothing about the deal changed. The only thing that changed was who was bringing up the hard conversation first or at all. The sponsors who close faster are not the ones with the best returns. They're the ones who make investors feel the most secure, the safest. Those are the different things that we need to handle. And the second one closes deals. There's also a longer game here that almost new sponsors never play. Investors need repetition. They need to see you show up consistently over time, not just when you have a deal to pitch, but between deals, sharing market insights, sending updates, staying in their orbit without always having an ask, right? You don't want to feel desperate. They can sense that. They can smell it. That kind of consistent presence is what builds the trust that eventually converts to fully funded deals. And once momentum builds, once the first few investors are in, it starts to compound. You feel your confidence rise, referrals come in, the next conversation starts warmer than the last one, the process gets meaningfully easier. But you have to stay in it long enough to reach that point. Most sponsors quit before they get there. Let me give you a practical picture of what this looks like when it's actually working. You're not closing $1 million with one investor. Maybe you are, but probably not. You're building it in pieces. 25K here, 50 there, 100K from another one. You're building it piece by piece. And those pieces do not all close at the same time. They close when each individual investor hits their own threshold of trust. And that threshold is different for every single person, every one of your investors. Some people will commit after 3 conversations, some after 8. Every once in a while, maybe 1. But some will watch you for 6 months before they move. A few will surprise you by moving faster than expected because you caught them at the right moment in their own financial journey in life at the time. You do not control when an individual investor reaches their threshold, but you absolutely control how many conversations you're in at any given time. The more relationships you're actively building and maintaining, the more opportunities you have for commitments to close, and the less any single no or any single stall has any power to derail you. Here's what the mechanics look like practically. Track every single conversation, not just the names. Track where each person is in terms of their engagement and their interest. Who have you talked to in the last 2 weeks? Who's gone quiet? Who needs a follow-up? And what would make that follow-up worth their time? Get personable. Have a follow-up cadence. Show up with something worth sending, a relevant article, a market update, a quick note that references something specific from a previous conversation. What about their kids? What kind of sports do they play? Learn about them. I've seen raises that should have closed fall apart purely on follow-up failure. It's all about the follow-ups. Sponsor had a genuinely interested investor, a warm conversation, a clear next step, and then went 2 weeks without contact. By the time they followed up, the investor had moved on emotionally, not to a competitor, but just out of the headspace where they don't want to invest that $100,000. They'd rather sit on the sideline. Momentum is real, and it dissipates faster than most people realize. None of this stuff is complicated, but most new sponsors just don't do it. They don't get it. They have a few great conversations, they let the follow-up drop, and then wonder why momentum stalled. The first $1 million is not won in the pitch. It's won in the follow-ups. It's all about the follow-ups, the follow-through, over and over and over again. So here's what raising your first $1 million actually looks like when you understand the process. It's not 10 conversations. It's 50, it's 100, 10x. Plan for that number and you stop quitting too early. Go in expecting less and you'll misread the process as failure when it's actually just math. It's a numbers game. It doesn't come from strangers. It comes from your network, people who already have a reason to trust you. And the trust they need to make is a financial decision, and that's different from personal trust. You build it by showing up consistently before you ever have a deal to pitch. It does not close on a great pitch alone. It closes through consistent follow-up over and over and over again. Honest communication about risk, showing up repeatedly until the trust reaches the level where a financial decision feels safe to make. Your first million is not about finding the perfect investor. It's about becoming someone enough people trust with their money. That takes more conversations than you think, more time than you think, more follow-ups than you think. Do the work. Have the conversations. Stay in the process longer than feels comfortable. The people who close are the ones who do not quit before the momentum builds. It will get easier, but you have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. If you want a step-by-step system for building this process, the pipeline, the relationship cadence, the legal structure, the investor materials, the Fund Founders Playbook walks you through all of it. It's free. The link is in the description. Go to SethBradleyESQ.com and grab it today. If this reframed how you think about your raise, subscribe. I put out content specifically on raising capital the right way, the process, the psychology, and the positioning that actually moves investors from interested to committed. New episodes every single week. I'll see you in the next one. Keep raising the bar, enjoying the journey. Peace.